Good morning and welcome to this episode of Stewarding Family Wealth, brought to you by Centurion Advisory Group, a Gwinnett-based independent fee-only wealth management firm. We are hosted by Gwinnett Business RadioX and the always outstanding Amanda Pierce. Amanda, thank you so much for being behind the desk engineering for us today. Our guest today is Charlie Reavis. This is a second episode with Charlie. If you listen to our earlier podcast, just filled with stories about the things that Charlie has learned over his lifetime, we are going to continue the discussion today. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning, Randy. Great to be with you.
Thank you. So glad that you were here. We had, we talked about your granddad. We talked about corporate journey with the Bell system with AT&T, and we had talked about, how to evaluate from when you make business investments. There was one thing that you mentioned, though, that I wanted to come back to, and your granddad taught you to pay yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
So you have $1.
Yep.
Always carve out a piece of it to set aside for your own future. Was that the gist of the?
Yeah, it was a case of really what he was saying was you need to have what he called a rainy day fund.
Okay.
So the way you establish that is always pay yourself.
Okay.
And as I mentioned in the earlier segment, was that he always taught me if I had a loan, whether it's for a car or anything else, where I needed to repay somebody, that was paramount. That was non-negotiable. That was paid.
Set money aside, pay cash.
And you paid that. But then you also would pay yourself some amount out of every paycheck that you ever received in your entire life. Any money coming in, he would always say, pay yourself. And what he meant, as I said, again, was you're building, as he referred to it, a rainy day fund, but you're really setting aside savings that you have so that when you get opportunities, like we talked about earlier, that perhaps you'll be in a position to take advantage of them. And plus the fact it allows you to sleep a little bit better at night.
That's true. So everything from, buying those things you need in your life that you may not be able to cover out of current cash flow, like buying a new car, or taking advantage of opportunities, or preparing for your own future if there's ever a day that, we study how people allocate cash internally, and so I've developed a couple of thoughts about it. Mm-hmm. And this may sound very strange, it may sound extremely conservative, but here's a thought, because I have watched this, and I am not going to name names, but I could name you. But having studied this for decades, all right, here's my observation. If a household or a person, when they have $1 of cash flow, set aside 20 cents to cover their tax liabilities, choose to set aside 10 cents just to give away, mm-hmm. live with an open hand, just give it somewhere where you know you're not going to get a return, just to make a difference somewhere.
Right.
It embeds a sense of, it releases you from the tyranny of ownership, okay?
Right.
And then finally take another dime out of that $1 and set it into the rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
A household or person can discipline themselves to that habit and then just live the rest of their lives on the other 60 cents. Over time, it will yield a quality that is almost unsurpassed. In terms of quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember my great-grandfather, his name was Jim Adams, born in 1874 in Kansas.
Mm.
All right. When he reached age 65, it was 1939, okay? 2 years after Social Security became the law of the land.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So Grandpa Jim, when he turned 65, started getting Social Security checks. The first 4 or 5 of those he sent back. He said, "I don't need the government's money.
Yep.
I don't need." That's what you're talking about from your grandfather, and we're in a very different culture now. But I believe it's prudent of us
mm-hmm.
to discipline ourselves, because there's this thought that the government will always have money. Well, they're not sending us something that they haven't taken from somebody else, even if it's through inflation. But that's a whole separate podcast or 5. But the thought of preparing well is critical to to handling money well, making good decisions, is set money aside consistently for long-term reserves.
Right.
Let's change subjects for a second.
Okay.
All right. Required minimum distributions. Okay.
Yeah. Fun topics.
All right. I know you don't like this subject because what happens if you embrace those good habits across decades, and you have access to retirement plans at work, and you put money in, you end up with the 7 and 8 figure IRAs, and the required minimum distributions can just get out of hand. They can be lots and lots of money, all of which are taxable.
Right.
Well, most of the time they're taxable.
Most of the time.
Okay.
Correct.
So you have to pay attention so that you can manage your taxes well within this time frame. So, okay, so you've lived long enough that you've hit those ages where you're required to take distributions out of your IRA, right?
Correct.
Okay. So right now that age has moved up to 72. There's conversation in Congress about moving that up to age 75, but right now, so you're taking your required minimum distributions. And or let's call it RMDs. So RMDs is the philosophy in tax law that since IRAs and all their brothers and sisters, simple IRAs, SEP IRAs, 401ks, that collection of before tax assets is designed to generate cash flow when you would rather roll over than roll out and go to work. Therefore, the government requires that you take something out of those IRAs as taxable income.
Right.
Okay, so that goes back in the 70s and 80s. A few years ago, and time gets by, so it may be 10 years, maybe 15 years, but several years ago, there was legislation that allowed your RMDs, if you chose, to go to a charity of your choice,
mm-hmm.
and to go to that charity without ever stopping by your tax return as income.
Right.
Okay. So the traditional RMD, you just get this RMD, you take money out of your IRA, the minimum is mandated by law. At the end of the year, you get your 5498, it shows what the distributions are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that is reported as income.
Right.
The challenge with a growing income once you reach Social Security and Medicare age, okay, is first of all, you're still paying tax on your income. And the higher your income, the higher your marginal tax rate.
Correct.
In addition to that, Medicare premiums are what I call means tested.
Correct.
So in simple language, that means the more money you make, the higher your Medicare Part B premiums are.
Right.
Okay. I will admit I live and work in a bubble, but this is meaningful for those of you who are in RMD territory, who have parents that have embraced the habits that Charlie exemplifies for these years. Your income as you move through your 70s is probably what it was when you were working. All you're doing is just experiencing the benefits of decades of good habits. So distributions directly to charity are called qualified charitable distributions.
Right.
Everything on the planet has an acronym, so let's call those QCDs.
Correct.
Okay, so you have the RMD and you have its cousin, the QCD.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the way it works is if you're in RMD territory, and you are, then Charlie, you can choose to transfer some or all, entirely your choice about the percentage or amounts, some or all of your RMD to a charity of your choice, and as long as it's a 501c3 and designed to receive deductible contributions,
Right.
Medical, religious, scientific, literary, all that stuff, then the amount that goes to the charity does not hit your income tax return and is not included in AGI. Is that right?
That's correct.
Meaning that if for those who have significant retirement incomes, regardless of the source, from IRA distributions, from pension income, from dividends, interest, just from a life of good habits, you end up with good solid cash flow. There's tax benefit in making that qualified charitable distribution of that QCD.
That's exactly right, Randy. And there are a couple of key aspects to that, and you touched on before, and that is, as the owner of the IRA, as the individual owner, you cannot touch those funds. So what I do is I simply have the custodian of my IRA do a wire transfer to the charity or charities of my choice into their account directly.
Okay.
So I never touch the funds. I don't see them. That's between the two organizations. And so that's one of the requirements that has to be fulfilled in order for that amount of money out of your IRA not to hit your tax return or become part of your AGI. You cannot touch those funds yourself.
Okay, so if the custodian simply sent you a check, let's say that I'm not going to use numbers, but let's say that you received a check for the amount of the RMD, and then you turned around and stroked the check out of your Brenda's personal checkbook to the charity. Okay. In that case, when that check comes to you, that whatever that dollar amount is included on your as income to you and as part of your AGI, and as you know, your taxes, your Medicare premiums, and so many other things are a function of your AGI, your modified AGI, MAGI.
Right,
okay,
right.
So if it comes to you, then it's income.
It's a distribution. It's counted as income. Then if you take the distribution as you described, and then you turn around and write the check to a charity, then potentially you can deduct that contribution depending on what your personal tax situation is, and whether you take a standard deduction or ever how you do your taxes. But under any circumstances, it's going to drive up your income, and it's going to drive up your AGI, which means that the amount of tax you pay on Social Security that you collect every month is determined by your AGI. And as you talked about, the big kicker is Medicare premiums, which has a significant penalty depending on what your AGI number is each year.
Right.
So it can have, basically it's a compounding impact to retirees. And that's why that I encourage people that I talk with to utilize the Roth IRA to maximum benefit, because then that way once you retire, then you take distributions, but you've already paid tax on the amount that's in the Roth IRA, so you don't get hit again, driving up your AGI.
Right.
So the QCD is a great opportunity for people to manage their taxes the best they can, but it is also a huge benefit for nonprofits, for charities. And that's where, that's basically how I make my charitable contributions, is through the QCD.
Okay. So operationally, and I want to talk more about the charity you give, the primary charity that you give to, but so operationally, then the dollars, in order to qualify as a QCD, the dollars must go directly from the custodian to the charity. So operationally, you pick the amount, or pick 100% of your RMD, or even, frankly, even more.
Right.
Okay, up to $100,000.
Correct.
Okay, unless your RMD is over $100,000, and right now the QCD limit's $100,000 annually. Okay?
Right.
You sign a service form that's provided by the custodian that directs the custodian to transfer this dollar amount by check, by wire, by some means of transfer to the charity of your choice.
Correct.
And in that, you simply give that custodian whatever identifying information is needed. If it's electronic transfer, then it's routing information for the receiving brokerage account or bank or whatever. If it's by check, then it's address of record, that kind of thing. So that's the operational components of that. But it must go directly from the custodian to the charity. It cannot be made payable to you. It cannot stop by your checking account. Those kind of things.
Correct.
So that's the way you do most of your charitable giving, right?
That's exactly right.
And
yes.
The large majority of your charitable giving goes to the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association, NSDA.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's correct.
And as I understand it, the bulk of in the future, your death, Brenda's death, the bulk of your estate will also go to medical research.
That's correct.
Yeah. So tell me. Let's come back and revisit NSDA. So tell us the history, the why, how you got involved. I mean, you volunteered your entire life. You stepped away from corporate, from the bail system almost 20 years ago. Within 4 years, you were president of NSDA, and you've continued to serve in that role. Purely volunteer, probably 20 or 30 hours a week, I would expect.
That's probably a good minimum estimate.
So,
but it's as I classify it all the time, it's a labor of love.
Yes.
I mean, it really is, because it's a fantastic organization, first of all, and secondly, it's just who I am and who I grew up to be, with all of the influences, whether it's my granddad, my parents. I just had a great family that had all the good influences that, fortunately, I was able to carry most of those through my adult life.
Yeah.
Like everybody else, I'm sure there's a few along the way that I should have carried forward but didn't. But nevertheless, about the year 2000, late 1999, 2000, I started experiencing voice problems.
Okay.
And what I noticed was when I was up and speaking to a group, and of course in the position I had in the corporate world, it was just, that's what you did all the time. You're speaking to meetings, groups, whatever the case was, and sometimes, huge numbers of people. And it was just, I was one of those fortunate people that never really bothered me that much to get up in front of a crowd and talk to people. But I started noticing that in that time frame, 2000, that my voice was kind of getting a little wacky, and I was having a little difficulty saying certain words, and so I found myself starting to pause more. So immediately, I began saying, what the heck's going on with me? I've never been nervous standing up in front of a group speaking before. Is what's happening here?
Right.
I mean, all of a sudden I must sound like a total, idiot for the people out there. So at any rate, I started to visit some ENTs, ear, nose, and throat doctors, specialists. And after visiting with 5 or 6 of them, it was pretty obvious that they really didn't know what was going on with my voice. And it was kind of a typical journey that most people with this voice condition have, in that you're told that, maybe it's stress, and you need to get stress out of your life. Well, the person who can get stress out of their life, I'd like to meet. I'm still waiting. But everything from that to allergies. In fact, I went through the whole regimen of allergy tests, and
right.
When they test you for like 200 different allergies, it's pretty obvious that something's going to hit. You're
Right.
going to be allergic to something. So at any rate, but going through all of that, my voice was not improving. And I had one ENT that told me I had nodules on my vocal folds, so he wanted to do surgery. I said, I don't think so at this point, sir. So at any rate, long story. After visiting all those ENTs, I was actually out of the country, and my executive assistant called me and said that the very first EMT that I went to had called saying that he had a good friend who was an otolaryngologist, which was a person that had a little additional training than just the regular ENT.
Okay.
And additional training in voice. So he thought that his friend might be familiar with my voice problems if I wanted to go visit with him. So I said, sure, absolutely. And so we said, he actually set up the appointment, the whole bit. So I go to visit with the otolaryngologist. Within less than 5 minutes of sitting talking with him, he said, you have spasmodic dysphonia. And I remember so vividly a great relief coming over you, because now you've got a name to this thing.
Okay.
And it's all of a sudden, now it's, and you've had these people tell you that, well, it's basically in your head. Even a couple of neurologists
Wow.
I went to that wanted to refer me to psychologists and psychiatrists, and those two meetings didn't go well, so we'll leave it at that. So
I cannot imagine, Charlie.
yeah.
Oh, Lord.
So he told me spasmodic dysphonia, and he explained to me. He said, "We don't really have good treatment options. We don't really know what the cause is. So there, obviously, we don't have a cure for it. So you kind of go on this roller coaster. All of a sudden, you feel a bit of relief that you got a name for it." But then all of a sudden the roller coaster hits the top and is heading down underwater that, geez, we don't really know much about this, do we? So he explained that essentially the standard of treatment is botulinum toxin injections into and they're just tiny little muscles that control your vocal folds.
Okay.
So in my case, what happens with my voice is those little muscles spasm, and it causes my vocal folds essentially to slam together, and then they don't release properly to get the proper amount of airflow.
Okay.
So that's why a lot of times I will have to use more effort and pressure, and I kind of feel kind of a bit strangled maybe or something like
Okay.
that. So I'm having to put more pressure in to get the airflow that I need through my vocal folds in order to phonate or to speak.
Okay.
So it turned out that the otolaryngologist that I was talking with was actually doing some treatment sessions that same day. So I got my first Botox injection the same day that he told me what the condition was.
So it's a very rare voice condition that impacts voice quality. It's tied to spasms that impact your vocal folds, and no known cause, no known cure, just exists. And the standard of care then, and in your case, given the particular type of SD, the standard of care at this point is Botox injections that go into some of your neck muscles just above the collarbones. Or
well,
part of that
actually
bone
it
right
goes
there.
in, if you think about where your Adam's apple is,
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
just below your Adam's apple
Okay.
is where they inject.
Okay.
And most of the laryngologists use, including my physician, something called EMG, electromagnetic gain, where they put little electrodes on your neck and around the side of your neck. And it's connected to the needle that they actually do the injection with, and it's connected to a box where he will insert the needle into my throat, into the airway, into those muscles, and we'll say, okay, say E, and what happens is that is generating feedback through the needle into the box. So that's the electromagnetic gain reading that he sees, and it comes out essentially as a graph on the device that he's using, which in most cases they have just a box. Sometimes they project it up on the screen so you can actually lay there or sit there and look at it. So they know essentially through their experience the level of gain that they need depending on the graph and the feedback they're getting, if they're reasonably well in the good position within those tiny little muscles. And so that's kind of how the process works. And as I said, my type of SD is called AD, adductor, because my vocal folds slam together. The other predominant type is AB, abductor, meaning that people's vocal folds, or the muscles actually, spasm, that will not allow the vocal folds to come together enough. So too much air is escaping or going through the vocal fold, and people have a very breathy or low sounding voice, and it becomes very, very difficult for them to talk and to speak. And unfortunately, the little muscles that control the closing of your vocal folds are kind of in the back of your larynx. So it's much more difficult for the physician to get the needle into the position to inject or to treat people with that AB type. So as a result, many people with that type of spasmodic dysphonia have chosen not to get treatment. They just live with it.
Yeah. Wow. So tell us in the minutes we have left here. Tell us about the work. Two things. Tell us about the work of the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association, NSDA. Tell us about what it's involved with, what it's doing, its role in because 2 or 3 years into this, you obviously you went home, you did your research, you found NSDA, you started volunteering, and for most of pretty much ever since you retired, you've been board president, right?
Well, I've been on the board anyway for that period of time.
So tell us about the work of NSDA, and in particular, tell us tell our listeners how to find NSDA. If somebody they know, somebody they've met, somebody that works for them, a family member, somebody they know that is experiencing voice problems that have not been identified. They're experiencing what you experienced. You go to the psychiatrist and say it's in your head. Nah, it's allergies. It's this. You don't know what you're talking about. All that negative stuff you got. Okay.
Right.
If they're experiencing this, how do they find out more? How do they reach out to somebody? How do they connect with the support group?
Okay, great. First of all, after I was basically told, and we tend to use the word diagnosed, but told of the condition that I had, the president of the NSDA, National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association, contacted me through another person who happened to live here in Atlanta, who had been president of the organization prior to, at that time, the particular president. So, at any rate, that's how they kind of got to know something about me, and because I had known this other person for a while. So anyway, she contacted me and said, would you be interested in joining our board? Well, I was still working at that point. So my whole career had been corporate, and I loved it. I always had a great job and the whole bit. So I wasn't really ready to retire, but it was becoming clear to me that it was becoming more and more difficult for me to function to the level that I'd always expected of myself. Mm-hmm. So after she sent me the letter, and then about a month or so later, she actually called me. And that was the first time I had ever heard another person with a voice condition similar to mine.
Okay.
So we talked for a while, and they had a board meeting scheduled for, I don't recall now, but a few months after the time when she called me. And she said, hey, just come visit with us. Sit in the organization, sit through the board meeting, see what you think, so on and so forth. So I did, and decided that, hey, first of all, it's time for me to retire. Mm-hmm. And make a shift in my life. And secondly, I like the people here, so that looks pretty good. So okay, that's what we're going to do. So I essentially retired from the corporate world and became a NSDA board member pretty much at the same time.
Okay.
So within the first year of being on the board, they drafted me to become the treasurer of the organization, and then I don't know, 3 or 4 years or so later after that, became the vice president, and then in 2010 became president. So I've been president of the organization since 2010.
Okay.
So we have local support groups across the country. Right now we have about 50 local support groups, and we have well over 250 people around the country, and in fact around the world, that we call area contact people, who will help others that they learn about who have SD or a voice condition. And so those are what I refer to, and I tell those folks all the time, they are the face of our organization to their local communities. And we have just some fantastic people in those positions, and they do a great job. And that's where we spend a lot of our time helping people who are either recently diagnosed, or sometimes it will be people who have struggled for years with SD or some other voice condition that did not know about us, and that never, in some cases, never really met anyone with a different or a voice condition similar to theirs. So there are lots of voice conditions, but there are some that have, based on limited knowledge that we have today, we think they're in the realm of the neurological voice condition like spasmodic dysphonia, things like vocal tremor, muscle tension dysphonia, which there are different types of muscle tension dysphonia, which for a lot of people can be treated with speech therapy. But there are also people with muscle tension dysphonia where speech therapy does not help them that much. Then there's lots and lots of people with vocal fold paralysis and paresis. And it turns out that most of the people with vocal fold paralysis are what's called idiopathic vocal fold paralysis, meaning the physician really cannot determine what the cause is. So most likely it's related in some way to the neurological basis, perhaps similar to spasmodic dysphonia or vocal tremor. So what we did about 3 years ago is changed our mission and expanded our mission to include people with spasmodic dysphonia and what I labeled as related voice conditions. So we have been in the process for the last 2 or 3 years of making sure that people across the patient community understood that we're here to help you through research, education, awareness, and support.
So research, education, awareness, and support.
Correct.
Okay.
And part of that expanding our mission drove us to start thinking about, should we change the name of our organization?
Okay.
So the fact that it's called National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association is specific. It's in fact is exclusive to people with SD. So I want it to be, and we want it as a board, to be more inclusive, which should be consistent with our mission statement that we built about 3 years ago. So we're in the process of changing the name to Dysphonia International. And that's probably a year away at this point before we actually go live with it, because it requires a lot of regulations, filings with the IRS for nonprofit status, tax-exempt status for the new name, and then we filed with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to register and trademark our new name and logo and so forth.
Go through that process. So right now, you provide support through the support group. So if someone that's listening or somebody that they know may have a voice condition or just be struggling with some unidentified voice situation, then they could go to dysphonia.org, D as in dog, Y, S, P as in Paul, H, ONIA.org, dysphonia.org, and they can learn more.
Right.
Would they be able to send an email like through a contact section and say, I have this voice situation, I have no idea what's going on, what do I do next, or who do I talk to?
Absolutely. It's we redesigned our website a couple of years ago, and we're pretty proud of it. It has a lot of interactive features to the website. We also have lots of videos on there now where people can hear other people with voice conditions, but then there's multiple ways that they can contact us. And we also have a section on the website with all of our local groups around the country.
Okay.
So all they have to do is plug in their state and click on select, and it will give you within that particular state. Then you can go through and search by city within the state. So you can find a local group that you could contact those people. We have email addresses there. Or they can contact us in our office at simply nsda at dysphonia.org. In addition to that, we also have what we call a healthcare referral listing, where we have all the laryngologists and speech-language pathologists, SLPs, that we're aware of right now across the country who treat spasmodic dysphonia, muscle tension dysphonia, tremor, vocal fold paralysis.
All of it.
So they, again, go the same process, select your state, or click on your state, select that, and it will carry you to the particular state, and then you can search through by city to find a healthcare professional in your area or as reasonably close as possible, because, again, it's a relatively small physician community who treat spasmodic dysphonia because we're a small patient community.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I've been telling our people for the last almost last year is that, yes, we're changing our name, but our focus on research will continue to be spasmodic dysphonia, vocal tremor, MTD, and perhaps vocal fold paralysis. And we have information that we've developed for those conditions on our website, so people can go to our website. They can also order materials that we have available, brochures, little trifold cards that explain more about the particular voice condition and our organization. So the website, dysphonia.org, is just has a wealth of information.
All right, good. Two more things. We are basically at the end of our time here, but a couple more things I'd like to visit with you about just now shortly. One is dysphonia.org, Dysphonia International. Let's call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Funds research.
Correct.
But you have a specific methodology about how you fund research, because a lot of medical research is $500,000, $1 million, multi-million-dollar research projects, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so but you have a particular approach. It's sort of seed funding for research. So talk for a little bit about your methodology and how you fund research.
Okay, great. We decided a few years ago that just simply putting out requests for research projects really was not producing the kind of interest in the research that's needed to understand the condition. Plus the fact that we realized that we were going to have to have a larger amount of money that we could use to fund the grant. So came up with the approach of what I've called seed funding for research just a few years ago. And we currently cap those funds at $50,000. But the idea is that we are now starting to work with a lot more research teams. We're much more proactive in reaching out to research teams around the country, around the world, in fact, and encouraging them to do research on spasmodic dysphonia, tremor, so forth. So with our seed funding, what we can do is help them to get their lab study set up, and it helps them with some initial funding. Obviously, $50,000 is not going to get you a whole lot of research, but the idea being that they can get their study set up, get their lab set up, and we also will help them recruit patients. We have just a phenomenal community who responds when we ask people hey, here's a project that we need volunteers for this particular research study, our community is very, very responsive. So
Good.
we help the researcher with volunteers, and then the idea is that they take initial preliminary results from the work they're able to do, submit to NIH for the type of grants that usually $1 million, $1 million plus, that's needed to carry this work forward, because that's unfortunately, beyond our capability of doing as a small organization.
So, good. So what you do is proof of concept may not be the right phrase, but you give them the seed funding so that they can begin to develop the framework for what the big grant is going to look like. Get some of the equipment in place, do some of the preliminary lay the foundation, so that they have enough meaningful information that the grant request to the National Institutes of Health is going to gather. It's going to. They'll pay attention to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's again, you've got to have some meaningful data to put in a grant application to the NIH.
Right.
And plus the fact that the last few years, particularly last maybe 3 or 4 years, the NIH has really started to ask research teams to work more closely with what's called patient advocacy groups, which essentially we are in terms of government lingo. For then that researcher to be able to take their preliminary data and information and submit their grant application, plus be able to say they're working with us already and we help them secure volunteers for the study and so on and so forth, that adds the type of information to that particular grant application that NIH is looking for. So it helps the researchers in a couple of ways.
Okay. Last question. I'll summarize it. So if one of our listeners, somebody in their family, has been touched by a voice condition,
right?
Okay, and let's say that they have appreciated stock, or maybe they're in RMD territory like you are, and they want to give. Okay, they want to do the QCD we talked about earlier, or they simply want to give appreciated stock. They can go to dysphonia.org. There's a way to learn about how to give on there, and there's operational protocol already in place where they can give appreciated stock. They can give from their RMD. So if people want to support financially, and especially those that have been touched by a voice condition, are often those that want to give, there are ways for them to do that as well.
Absolutely, and they go to our website. We have large donate buttons on various pages, and so all they do, click on donate, it gives you the various options, and we have any number of people each year who in fact donate appreciated stock. And our approach is that, we're not in the business of trying to evaluate anyone's stock or anything else. As soon as we get it, we sell it immediately, and so that's what the contribution for the individual would be, whatever their particular stock sells for, as soon as it hits into our. We have a financial institution that we work with, and a gentleman we've been working with for a long, long time. So as soon as it hits our account in his organization, he clicks the button and sells it.
And that's what they get their tax statement for
exactly.
at the beginning of the year.
That's
good,
right.
Good. I think that that covers what we wanted to cover today. Charlie, any closing comments here?
I just enjoyed it, Randy. Appreciate always opportunity of talking with you, and especially the opportunity to tell people a little bit about the NSDA and my voice condition, and anything that we can do to help any of you out there who, if you have a voice condition, you have family members, whatever, contact us. It's real easy. Go on our website or simply send us an email, nsda@dysphonia.org. And I've enjoyed talking about especially my granddad's influence and some of those business things I learned over the years too.
Good.
And so appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you. Thank you for spending time with us these last 2 episodes. I very much appreciate it. And folks, that's it for us today for this episode. Thank you for joining us on Gwinnett Business Radio X, listening to Stewarding Family Wealth, brought to you by Centurion Advisory Group. You can learn more about us if you would like at centurionag.com. That's it, and we'll talk to you soon.